What happens when a multi-billionaire, a woman who commands boardrooms and moves markets with a single phone call, breaks down in the middle of a humble diner? It's not over a failed merger or a stock market crash. It's over a simple tarnished silver necklace worn by a waitress living paycheck to paycheck. This isn't just a story about wealth and poverty. It's a story about a secret buried for 30 years, a devastating betrayal, and a single piece of jewelry that holds the power to reunite a family or tear it apart forever. Stay with us as we unravel the incredible true life story of Eleanor Vance and the waitress who unknowingly held the key to her heart. Eleanor Vance was a creature of habit and precision. At 82, she ran the Vance global conglomerate with the same iron will she'd possessed at 42. Her world was one of sterile boardrooms, sanitized private jets, and hushed conversations with men who managed fortunes larger than the GDP of small countries. Yet once a month, she broke her own rules. She would dismiss her driver, take a simple black town car, and visit the Corner Bistro, a quiet, unassuming restaurant in a part of New York City she rarely frequented anymore. It wasn't the food she came for, though it was decent. It was the ghost of a memory. This was where she and her late husband, Richard, had their first real date. Back then, it was just a struggling diner, and they were just two ambitious kids with a dream cooked up in a garage. Now the garage was a global tech campus, and Richard was 10 years gone. The bistro was a time capsule, and sitting in her usual corner booth, Eleanor felt the suffocating weight of her empire lift, replaced by the heavier, sharper weight of grief. She traced the rim of her water glass, her mind drifting to Richard's laugh, the way he'd steal fries from her plate. "More water, ma'am?" Eleanor looked up, pulled from her reverie. A young woman, likely in her late 20s, stood by the table with a pitcher. She had a kind, tired face, her brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail that had started to fray around the edges. Her uniform was clean but worn. Eleanor noted the slight tremor in her hand, the sign of a double shift, the exhaustion that clung to those who worked for a living, not for a legacy. "Yes, thank you," Eleanor said, her voice softer than her board members ever heard it. As the waitress leaned forward to pour the water, the lamplight from the fixture above caught something on her chest, a glint of silver. It was a necklace, long and delicate, tucked partially into the collar of her uniform. From the chain hung a small, uniquely shaped charm. It was a star, a locket fashioned into a five-pointed Polaris. Eleanor's breath hitched. Her manicured hand, adorned with a formidable diamond ring, flew to her own throat, where nothing lay but the crepey skin of old age. It couldn't be. It was impossible. There was only one of those in the world. Richard had designed it himself, had it custom made by a master silversmith in Italy for their 10th anniversary. The necklace," Eleanor stammered, her voice a raw whisper. The world around her seemed to warp and fade. The clatter of cutlery, the murmur of other diners, it all dissolved into a low hum. The waitress straightened up, a look of polite confusion on her face. She touched the star locket instinctively. "Oh, I'm sorry, is it unprofessional? I can tuck it in." "No," Eleanor said, her voice cracking. Her eyes, usually sharp and analytical, were suddenly clouded with a storm of emotion. She leaned forward, her gaze fixed on the piece of jewelry. She could see the faint, familiar scratches on its surface, the way the chain had worn thin near the clasp. "Where did you get that?" The question was not a polite inquiry. It was a demand, raw and desperate, stripped of all her usual composure. The waitress, whose name tag read Amelia, looked taken aback, even a little frightened by the sudden intensity of the old woman. It was my mother's," Amelia replied, her hand still protectively covering the locket. "It's been in my family a long time." "Your mother?" Eleanor's mind was a whirlwind. Isabella, her daughter, her beautiful, rebellious, lost daughter. The argument, the slammed door, the years of silence that followed, it all came crashing back. Eleanor pushed herself to her feet, her movements unsteady. The carefully constructed fortress of her composure, built over decades of loss and ruthless business, was crumbling. She reached a trembling hand across the table, not to touch the necklace, but as if pleading with it, with the ghost it represented. "Please, Eleanor whispered, and the sound was so broken it startled them both. I have to know. What was your mother's name? Amelia hesitated, her brow furrowed with concern. This elegant, powerful woman was visibly falling apart in front of her. Are you all right, ma'am? Should I get you some air? Her name, Eleanor insisted, her voice rising, drawing stares from the adjacent tables. A single tear, hot and heavy, escaped her eye and traced a path through the fine lines on her cheek. Then another, and another. The billionaire, the titan of industry, Eleanor Vance, stood in the middle of a cheap bistro and began to sob, a heart-wrenching, silent breakdown that shook her entire frame, all for a waitress's necklace. Amelia, stunned and overwhelmed, could only whisper the answer. Her name was Isabella Reed. Isabella. Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth to stifle a cry of pure, unadulterated anguish. It was her. After 30 years of searching, of hiring private investigators who came up with nothing, of nights spent staring at an empty nursery, here was the answer. In a bistro, around the neck of a tired waitress. Her granddaughter. The ride to Eleanor's estate was a blur of silence and disbelief. Amelia, who had called her friend to cover the rest of her shift, sat awkwardly in the plush leather seat of the Rolls-Royce Phantom, a vehicle more luxurious than any apartment she had ever lived in. Beside her, Eleanor Vance was a study in contained grief, her eyes red-rimmed but dry now, staring out at the city lights as if seeing them for the first time. They pulled through imposing wrought-iron gates and up a long, winding driveway to a sprawling stone mansion that looked more like a museum than a home. A uniformed butler, a man named Charles, who had served the Vance family for 40 years, opened the door, his face a mask of professional concern at the sight of his employer's disheveled state and her unexpected guest. Mrs. Vance, is everything all right? He asked, his voice a low, respectful baritone. Everything has changed, Charles, Eleanor said, her voice heavy with meaning. Please bring tea to the library for 2. The library was a room out of a dream, with floor-to-ceiling mahogany shelves, a rolling ladder, and the scent of old paper and leather. A grand fireplace dominated one wall, a portrait of a handsome, smiling man hanging above it. It was Richard. Eleanor sank into a deep armchair near the hearth. Please sit, she gestured to Amelia, who chose a stiff-backed chair opposite her, perching on the edge as if ready to flee. Ma'am, Mrs. Vance, I don't understand what's happening, Amelia began, her voice trembling slightly. Eleanor took a deep, shuddering breath. That necklace, she started, her gaze drifting back to the silver star. My husband, Richard, the man in the portrait, he had it made for me. There is only one in the world. It is a locket. Is there anything inside? Amelia's hand went to the locket. My mother told me never to open it. She said it would only bring questions I wasn't ready for. She hesitated, then her fingers found the tiny, almost invisible clasp. With a faint click, the star opened. Inside, on one side, was a tiny, faded photograph of a young, laughing couple. It was a much younger Eleonora and Richard. On the other side, an inscription was engraved in elegant script. Amelia squinted to read the words aloud. To my Polaris, forever my guide. R.V. Her eyes widened as she looked from the picture to the woman in front of her, the connection finally impossibly clicking into place. Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes again. Polaris, the North Star. He always said I was his guide, the fixed point in his universe. She paused, gathering her strength. 31 years ago, I gave that locket to my only daughter, Isabella. She began to tell the story, her voice low and filled with a pain that time had not dulled. Isabella was her world, a vibrant, artistic, free-spirited girl who was the light of her and Richard's life. But as she grew older, she clashed with the rigid, high society world Eleonora was grooming her for. Then she fell in love. His name was Daniel Reed. Eleonora recounted, shame coloring her tone. He was a musician, a wonderful, gentle soul, but he had nothing. No money, no prospects, no name. I was afraid for her. I wanted her to have security, the life I had fought so hard to build. I forbade her from seeing him. The memory was sharp, a shard of glass in her heart. The fight had been terrible. Words were said that could never be taken back. "You care more about your money than my happiness," Isabella had screamed. "You don't understand love, only contracts and acquisitions." She was 22, Eleonora whispered. She packed a bag that night. "I thought she'd be back in a day, a week at most, but she never came back. She just vanished." She looked at Amelia, her eyes pleading for understanding. "We searched for years. We hired the best people. It was as if she had disappeared from the face of the earth." Richard died without ever knowing what happened to his little girl. Amelia listened, her own history being rewritten with every word. Her mother, Isabella Reed, had raised her alone. She had been a loving but melancholic woman who worked as a freelance artist, always struggling to make ends meet. She spoke little of the past and never of Amelia's father or her own family. She had always said they had died in an accident. She had passed away from pneumonia 5 years ago, leaving Amelia with little more than a box of old sketches and the silver locket. "My mother, she told me my father gave her the locket before he died in a car crash, before I was born," Amelia said softly, the lies she had believed her whole life crumbling. "She said her parents were gone too. She never wanted to talk about it." "Daniel Reed, did he die in a crash?" Eleonora asked, her heart pounding. Amelia shook her head slowly. "I don't know. My mother never used his name. I only know it from my birth certificate. She was always so sad. Now I think I understand why. She was alone. She cut herself off from you to be with him, and then she lost him too." The two women sat in silence, the chasm of 30 years of secrets and sorrow between them. In the space of an hour, a waitress had discovered her mother was the runaway daughter of a billionaire, and a billionaire had discovered her lost child had lived and died in obscurity, leaving behind a granddaughter she never knew she had. "You have her eyes," Eleonora said finally, a sad smile touching her lips. "The same fire." She leaned forward. Do you have any children, Amelia?" Amelia's guard, which had been up all evening, finally dropped. A genuine warm smile transformed her tired face. "Yes, I have a son. His name is Leo. He's 6. A great-grandson." The news was a balm on Eleonora's wounded soul, a new branch on a family tree she thought had withered. "I want to meet him," Eleonora said, her voice thick with emotion. "Amelia, I want to give you everything. Everything that should have been your mother's. Everything that is rightfully yours." But before Amelia could even process the offer, the doors to the library swung open. A man in a tailored suit with Eleonora's sharp features, but none of her warmth, stood in the doorway. Beside him was a woman dripping in diamonds, her expression cold and appraising. It was Julian Vance, Eleonora's son and the CEO of Vance Global, and his wife, Beatrice. "Mother," Julian said, his voice clipped and laced with suspicion as he stared at the waitress sitting in his family's library. "Charles said you had a guest. Who is this?" Julian and Beatrice Vance swept into the library like a pair of circling vultures. Julian, the younger of Eleonora's 2 children, had inherited her ambition, but not her sentimentality. He saw the world in terms of assets and liabilities. Beatrice, his wife, was a creature of society, her value measured in cooter and connections. Her smile never reached her eyes, which were constantly scanning for threats to her position. They both stopped short, their gazes falling on Amelia. They saw not a long-lost relative, but an anomaly, a disruption. They saw her worn polyester uniform, her cheap, sensible shoes, and the stunned expression on her face. Their eyes flickered to the tea service, then to Eleonora's tear-streaked face. "Mother, what's going on?" Julian demanded, his tone suggesting he was managing a corporate crisis, not a family matter. "Who is this woman?" Beatrice glided further into the room, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. She noticed the open locket in Amelia's hand. "My goodness, what a commotion. You look distressed, Eleonora. Has this woman upset you?" Her voice was smooth as silk, but laced with venom. Eleonora straightened her back, the formidable matriarch returning. "Julian, Beatrice, this is Amelia Reed. She is Isabella's daughter." The statement hung in the air, heavy and explosive. Julian's face went from suspicion to disbelief, then settled into a hard, cynical mask. Beatrice let out a short, incredulous laugh. Isabella's daughter? Mother, you can't be serious. Isabella has been gone for 30 years, Julian scoffed. This is absurd. Is this some kind of joke? It is not a joke, Eleanor said, her voice dangerously quiet. She is wearing the Polaris locket, the one Richard gave me, and I gave to Isabella. Beatrice stepped closer, peering at the necklace with a dismissive air. A piece of jewelry, Eleanor, darling, that's hardly proof. Trinkets can be stolen, found, copied. This woman is clearly an opportunist. She probably heard some story and cooked up this little performance to get her hands on your money. Amelia, who had been frozen in her chair, found her voice. She stood up, her chin held high, the shock giving way to a spark of indignation. I didn't ask for any of this. I was working. Your mother is the one who— Silence, Julian snapped, cutting her off with a wave of his hand as if dismissing a servant. He turned back to Eleanor. Mother, think about this rationally. You're emotional. A waitress shows up with a sob story and a necklace, and you're ready to rewrite your will. How convenient, how utterly transparent. This isn't about the will, Julian. This is about my grandchild, Eleanor retorted, her voice rising. This is about my blood. Alleged grandchild, Beatrice corrected smoothly. A claim this extraordinary requires extraordinary proof, not just a sentimental piece of silver and a convenient story. The air in the room was thick with tension. It was no longer a space of potential reunion, but a courtroom where Amelia was the one on trial. She felt her cheeks burn with humiliation. These people were looking at her as if she were dirt on their expensive rug. They weren't seeing a person. They were seeing a threat to their inheritance. I don't want your money, Amelia said, her voice clear and steady despite the pounding in her chest. I didn't even know who any of you were an hour ago. All I know is that my mother is dead, and she was this woman's daughter. She looked at Eleonora, her expression softening. And I think she was very lonely. The genuine emotion in Amelia's voice only seemed to harden Julian's resolve. He saw it as a weakness to be exploited, a tactic in a larger game. How touching, he said with a sneer, a regular rags-to-riches fairy tale. Well, in the real world, we don't rely on fairy tales. We rely on facts, on evidence. He looked from Amelia to his mother, his eyes cold and calculating. There's only one way to settle this, a DNA test. Beatrice nodded in vigorous agreement. Precisely. A clinical, scientific, undeniable DNA test. We'll have our family lawyers arrange everything. We'll use the most reputable lab. No room for error or fraud. The word fraud was directed at Amelia like a poisoned dart. She flinched. The evening had spiraled from bewildering to terrifying. She had a son, Leo, to protect. The last thing she wanted was to drag him into this toxic world of wealth and suspicion. Eleanor looked at Amelia, her expression a mixture of apology and determination. They are right, Amelia. Not because I doubt you. In my heart, I know who you are. But to silence everyone else, to make it official, undeniable, for your sake and for your son's. Amelia felt trapped. To refuse the test would make her look guilty, like the gold digger they accused her of being. To agree meant stepping further into this nest of vipers. She thought of her tiny rented apartment, her mountain of bills, the constant worry that kept her awake at night. Then she thought of her son, Leo, and the opportunities a life like this could offer him. Good schools, health care, a future without struggle. But at what cost? Taking a deep breath, she met Julian's icy stare. Fine, she said, her voice firm. Do it. Do the test. You'll see. I'm not lying. Julian gave a curt, satisfied nod. Excellent. Our lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, will be in touch to collect your sample tomorrow. He then turned to his mother. Until we have the results, I forbid you from giving this woman a single dollar. For all we know, this is an elaborate scam, and she could disappear the moment she gets paid. She will be staying here in this house as my guest, Eleanor declared, her authority ringing through the room. A look of fury flashed across Julian's face before he masked it. As you wish, mother, but don't say we didn't warn you. With a final withering look at Amelia, Julian and Beatrice turned and left the library, their victory hanging in the air. The warmth that had briefly filled the room was gone. replaced by the chilling reality of what lay ahead. Amelia wasn't just discovering a family. She was entering a war. The next few days were a surreal limbo. Amelia and her son Leo moved into a guest suite at the Vance mansion that was larger and more opulent than any home they had ever known. 6-year-old Leo was in heaven, convinced he had moved into a castle. He ran through the manicured gardens, marveled at the indoor swimming pool, and befriended the stern-faced butler, Charles, who found himself cracking a smile for the first time in years. For Amelia, however, the mansion felt like a gilded cage. She was a guest, but also a specimen under a microscope. The household staff treated her with a mixture of curiosity and formal distance, clearly taking their cues from Julian and Beatrice, who made their disdain known at every opportunity. Eleonora, on the other hand, tried her best to bridge the 30-year gap. She showered Leo with affection and gifts he was too young to understand the value of. She spent hours with Amelia, showing her old photo albums, sharing stories of Isabella's childhood, trying to piece together the life her daughter had lived. For the first time in a decade, a genuine light returned to Eleanor's eyes. She was rediscovering a part of herself she thought was dead and buried. "Your mother loved to paint," Eleanor said one afternoon, her gloved finger tracing over a photograph of a teenage Isabella with paint smudged on her cheek. She could find beauty anywhere, in a wilting flower, a crack in the pavement. Her voice trailed off, filled with regret. I tried to push her towards a more practical path, business, law. I didn't understand that her art was her soul. I smothered the very thing that made her special. Amelia listened, absorbing these new facets of her mother. She saw the pain and guilt that haunted Eleonora, and her heart went out to the old woman. A fragile bond began to form between them, woven from shared grief and tentative hope. But Julian and Beatrice were not idle. They viewed this budding relationship as a catastrophic threat to their dominion, their inheritance, their status, their power. It was all at risk. "She's manipulating her. You see it, don't you?" Beatrice hissed at Julian one evening in their own wing of the mansion. "Playing the part of the meek, grateful orphan. And your mother, addled by grief and age, is falling for it. Hook, line, and sinker." "The DNA results will take another week," Julian said, pacing his study. "We can't just wait. We need to discredit her. We need leverage. Something to prove she's not the saint she appears to be." Beatrice's eyes gleamed with a cruel intelligence. "Everyone has secrets, darling, especially people who have had to struggle. They get desperate. They make mistakes." She picked up her phone. "I know a man, a private investigator, Robert Sterling. He's discreet, and he's very, very good at finding dirt. Let's see what skeletons this little waitress has in her closet." Robert Sterling was a man who operated in the city's shadows. Within 2 days, he began digging into Amelia Reed's life. It was a disappointingly clean record. She worked hard, paid her bills, sometimes late, and had no criminal history. She was, by all accounts, a decent person, but Sterling was paid to find something, and if he couldn't find it, he was adept at creating it. He discovered that 2 years prior, Amelia had been in a minor car accident. The other driver, a man named Marcus Thorne, had been aggressive and claimed she was at fault. The insurance handled it, but not before Thorne had made a scene. Sterling saw an opening. He contacted Marcus Thorne, a man with a gambling problem and a perpetually empty wallet. For a few thousand in cash, Thorne was more than happy to change his story. He would now claim that Amelia had tried to bribe him at the scene, offering him cash to not call the police because she'd been drinking. It was a lie, but it was a believable one. Beatrice was delighted. It wasn't a felony, but it was enough. It painted a picture of a deceitful, manipulative person. It was a seed of doubt they could plant in Eleanor's mind at the perfect moment. Meanwhile, Amelia remained oblivious to the plot against her. Her biggest struggle was with her own identity. One day she was a waitress, the next the potential heiress to a billion-dollar fortune. The whiplash was severe. One afternoon, Mr. Abernathy, the family lawyer, a kind elderly man with gentle eyes, requested a meeting with her. "Mrs. Vance has instructed me to begin the process of recognizing you as her legal heir, pending the DNA results," he explained calmly. "This involves setting up trusts, understanding tax implications. It's a significant undertaking." Amelia felt a wave of nausea. Trusts, taxes. Mr. Abernathy, I still don't know how to use the coffee machine in the kitchen. It all feels wrong, like I'm an imposter. You are not an imposter, my dear, he said gently. You are family. But be warned, with a family like the Vances, that title comes with as much conflict as it does comfort. Julian and Beatrice will not accept you easily. His words were prophetic. Later that day, Amelia was in the garden watching Leo play when Beatrice approached her, a false, sweet smile plastered on her face. Enjoying the grounds? Beatrice asked, her tone dripping with condescension. You and your son have certainly made yourselves at home. Leo loves it here, Amelia replied politely, refusing to be baited. I'm sure he does, Beatrice purred. Children love shiny things, and you, Amelia, seem to have found the shiniest toy of all. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. A word of advice. Take a settlement. Eleonora will give you a few million to disappear. It would be enough to set you and your boy up for life. Take the money and run. Because if you stay, if you try to take what belongs to my husband, I will make your life a living hell. I will dig up every mistake you've ever made and broadcast it to the world. You won't just lose the inheritance, you'll lose your dignity too. The threat was undisguised, a declaration of war. Amelia stared at her, horrified but resolute. This isn't about the money for me. It's about my grandmother. Beatrice laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. Oh, you poor, naive girl. You have no idea what you're up against. She turned and walked away, leaving Amelia standing in the beautiful, sunlit garden, a cold dread seeping into her heart. The wait for the DNA results was now a ticking time bomb. The day the DNA results were due to arrive, the atmosphere in the Vance mansion was electric with tension. It felt less like a family home and more like the headquarters of two opposing armies waiting for a critical dispatch from the front line. Eleonora had requested everyone gather in the library, the same room where the drama had begun. She sat in her large armchair by the fireplace, Amelia and a quiet, nervous Leo on a sofa nearby. Julian and Beatrice took seats on the opposite side of the room, their posture rigid, their faces grim. Mr. Abernathy arrived precisely at 3:01 p.m. He was a man accustomed to high-stakes situations, but even he seemed to feel the oppressive weight in the room. He carried a single, sealed manila envelope. Good afternoon, he said, his voice a calm anchor in the stormy silence. I have the results from the lab. All eyes locked on the envelope. It contained more than just a scientific finding. It held the future of the Vance dynasty. Julian leaned forward, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. Beatrice's painted smile was tight, her eyes like chips of ice. Amelia held Leo's small hand, her own palm sweating. Mr. Abernathy carefully broke the seal and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He scanned it, his expression unreadable. After a moment that stretched for an eternity, he looked up, his gaze settling on Eleonora. The analysis compared the DNA sample provided by Miss Amelia Reed with a sample from yourself, Eleonora, he announced formally. The results are conclusive. He paused for dramatic effect. The probability of grand maternity is 99 or 99999%. Amelia Reed is, without any scientific doubt, the daughter of the late Isabella Vance Reed and your granddaughter. A collective gasp went through the room. Eleonora closed her eyes and a single tear of pure relief rolled down her cheek. She reached a hand out to Amelia, her smile radiant. I knew it, she whispered. I knew it in my soul. Amelia felt a wave of vindication wash over her. She squeezed Leo's hand and smiled back at her grandmother, a genuine, happy smile. It was real. It was all real. Julian slumped back in his chair as if he'd been punched, a look of pure fury on his face. This was his worst-case scenario. But Beatrice was not defeated. She was prepared. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Well, Beatrice said, her voice cutting through the emotional moment like a shard of glass. That's settled, then. She stood up, a folder in her hand that Amelia hadn't noticed before. While we were all waiting for this oh-so-touching reunion to be confirmed, Julian and I thought it prudent to do our own due diligence, to understand exactly who we are welcoming into this family. Eleonora's smile faded. Beatrice, what is the meaning of this? This is a moment for celebration. Is it? Beatrice replied, her voice saccharine. Or is it a moment to face the truth? You see, Eleonora, you may have found your blood, but you have no idea who this woman really is. She opened the folder. We hired a private investigator, Robert Sterling, very thorough. She pulled out a document and began to read. Let's see. Amelia Reed, a string of low-paying jobs, constantly behind on rent. But this is the interesting part. 2 years ago, on May 14th, a traffic accident on a Brooklyn street. The other driver, a Mr. Marcus Thorne. Amelia's blood ran cold. She remembered the incident, the belligerent man who had yelled at her. According to Mr. Thorne's sworn affidavit, Beatrice continued, her eyes gleaming with triumph, Ms. Reed was erratic and smelled of alcohol. When he threatened to call the police, she offered him $500 in cash to forget the whole thing. An attempt to bribe a man to cover up a DUI. How resourceful. The accusation was a bombshell. It was a complete and utter lie, but it was presented with such authority, a sworn affidavit, that it sounded damning. That's not true, Amelia cried out, jumping to her feet. He's lying. The man was a maniac. He screamed at me, but I was not drinking. I never offered him money. Of course you'd say that, Julian chimed in, rising to stand with his wife. You're a born liar. Your whole life has been a struggle, scrounging for money. The opportunity arises. You try to lie and cheat your way out of trouble. It's in your character. Eleonora looked from Julian and Beatrice's smug faces to Amelia's panicked one. A flicker of doubt, a tiny poisonous seed was planted. She had been so blinded by hope, so desperate to believe in this fairy tale. Had she been naive? She thought of her own world, a world of contracts, betrayals, and ruthless ambition. People lied for far less than $1 billion inheritance. Amelia, is there any truth to this? Eleonora asked, her voice faltering. The question itself was a betrayal, and it shattered Amelia's heart. Tears sprang into Amelia's eyes, tears of hurt and fury. After everything, after the DNA tests, after opening her life to this family, to have her grandmother, the one person she was beginning to trust, look at her with suspicion, it was too much. You believe them, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She looked at Eleonora's conflicted face and saw that the seed of doubt was already taking root. The joy of the moment was gone, poisoned by a calculated lie. Beatrice had won this round. She had successfully turned a moment of reunion into one of accusation and mistrust. Amelia shook her head, a profound sense of despair washing over her. I can't do this, she said, her voice barely audible. She took Leo's hand, pulling him close. I don't want your money. I don't want any of this. She turned and fled the library, leaving behind a stunned silence, a triumphant Beatrice, and a heartbroken old woman whose greatest hope had just been corrupted by a venomous lie. Amelia's retreat back to the guest suite was not a flight of anger, but a collapse of the soul. Each step up the grand curving staircase felt heavier than the last, as if the very marble were trying to hold her captive in this beautiful, cruel world. The flurry of packing was desperate, a frantic attempt to erase her and Leo's brief existence from the opulent room. She threw their meager belongings, worn jeans, faded t-shirts, a handful of Leo's small toys, into their old, scuffed duffel bags. The juxtaposition was sickening, their life of patched-together survival starkly laid bare against the backdrop of silk drapes and hand-carved mahogany. The luxurious room, which only hours ago had represented a dream of impossible security, now felt like a prison cell, its walls whispering judgments and its gilded fixtures mocking her poverty. Leo, his small face a mask of confusion and fear, clutched the magnificent, oversized teddy bear Eleonora had given him. The bear, a symbol of a grandmother's love, now seemed like a Trojan horse, a beautiful gift hiding a core of poison and mistrust. He watched his mother's tears fall silently, his innocent world fractured without his understanding why. We're going home, sweetie, Amelia choked out, her voice a fragile thread she fought to keep from snapping. Back to our real home. Her resolve was a cold, hard diamond forming in the crucible of her humiliation. She could endure poverty. It was an old, familiar coat she knew how to wear. She could endure hardship. It was the air she had breathed her entire life. But she would not, could not, endure being branded a liar and a cheat. She would not allow her son to grow up in the shadow of a family that saw him not as blood, but as a liability, a pawn in their vicious games of inheritance. The brief, flickering moment of doubt in Eleanor's eyes, that was the mortal wound. It had severed the fragile, budding bond between them more cleanly and cruelly than any of Julian's calculated lies. Downstairs, the library had transformed from a sanctuary of reunion into a gladiatorial arena. The air, thick with the scent of old leather and rage, crackled with the force of their argument. "How could you?" Eleanor's voice, usually so controlled, was a raw, trembling fury. Her own heartbreak was rapidly crystallizing into a formidable anger. "You took a moment of pure, unadulterated joy, a miracle after 30 years of silence, and you deliberately, maliciously destroyed it. You poisoned it with your greed." "We revealed the truth," Julian shot back, his face a mask of cold indignation. He rose to his feet, pacing before the fireplace like a caged predator. "We are trying to protect you. This woman is a grifter. Her character is fundamentally flawed. Can you even begin to imagine the scandal when the tabloids get their hands on this? Billionaire's heiress in DUI bribery scandal. It would be a stain on the Vance name that would take decades to wash out. A name you and father built from nothing." "A name you seem to care about more than your own family," Eleanor retorted, her hands clenched into fists. "More than your long-lost niece? More than my one final chance at happiness? My primary duty is to this company, to this legacy," Julian thundered, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "That is the single most important lesson you ever taught me. You cannot let this senile sentimentality cloud your judgment and put everything Richard and you built at risk. Not for some waitress who conveniently appeared out of thin air." Their venomous exchange was pierced by a soft, hesitant knock on the library door. It was Charles the butler, his posture impossibly correct, but his face etched with a deep, sorrowful gravity. "Mrs. Vance, I apologize for the intrusion," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Ms. Reed has packed her bags. She has called for a taxi and is waiting by the front gate with the young master." Eleanor's heart plummeted, the rage in her chest instantly extinguished by a tidal wave of sheer panic. She was leaving. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. She was about to lose her family all over again. The first time was to a youthful, tragic misunderstanding. This time it would be to her own weakness, her own son's calculated cruelty. She had to stop her. She could not let this happen. As Eleanor rushed from the room, her elegant shoes silent on the thick Persian rugs, Amelia was in her suite, conducting one final, heart-wrenching sweep. Had she left anything? A stray sock? A coloring book of Leo's? Her eyes scanned the cavernous walk-in closet. On the top shelf, pushed into a dark corner, sat a battered cardboard box. It was the box she had brought from her apartment, the one containing the sum total of her mother's worldly possessions. In the whirlwind of the past week, she hadn't had the heart or the courage to look through it. Now some deep, primal instinct compelled her to reach for it. The box felt heavy with the weight of unspoken history. The tape was yellowed and brittle. Inside, nestled among old stiffened paintbrushes and sketchbooks filled with hauntingly beautiful drawings, was a bundle of letters. They were tied with a single, faded blue ribbon. With trembling fingers, Amelia saw the elegant, familiar script on the topmost envelope, an address that made her blood run cold. Mrs. Eleanora Vance, Vance Estate, New York. They had never been sent. The postmarks were all dated over 30 years ago. With a sense of sacred dread, she untied the ribbon. The paper was fragile, almost translucent with age. She began to read the first one. "Dearest Mother, I hope this letter finds you. I've tried calling, but the staff always says you're unavailable. No one ever puts me through. I am so sorry for the things I said. I was angry and hurt, but I never stopped loving you. Daniel and I are struggling, but we are happy. I wish you could see that. Please, Mother, just talk to me." Amelia's breath caught in a sob. Her mother had tried to reconcile. She hadn't been too proud. She had reached out. She grabbed the next letter, her hands shaking so badly she could barely read. It was dated a few months later. Mother, something wonderful has happened. I'm pregnant. You're going to be a grandmother. I know you must be angry with me, but I hope the news of a grandchild will soften your heart. We want to come home. I've left a dozen messages with Julian's assistant. Has he not passed them on? Please call me at this number. The words leaped off the page, searing themselves into her mind. Julian's assistant, a cold dread, slick and oily, washed over her. She frantically tore through the other letters. The narrative they painted was one of increasing desperation. Letters detailing Daniel's sudden aggressive illness, a fast-acting cancer. Letters begging for help, not for herself, but for him, for money for treatments they couldn't afford. And then, the final, heart-shattering letter. Mother, Daniel is gone. He died this morning. I am alone, and I am 7 months pregnant. I have nothing left. I called the main house again today, desperate just to hear your voice. Julian answered. He was so cold. He told me you wanted nothing to do with me. He said you told him that my choices had consequences and that I was to never contact the family again. He said you had disowned me. My heart is broken, Mother, not just for losing Daniel, but for losing you too. I won't bother you again. I will raise this baby on my own. Goodbye, your daughter, Isabella. The letter fell from Amelia's numb fingers, fluttering to the floor like a dead leaf. The world tilted on its axis, the sounds of the grand house fading into a dull, roaring silence. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a tragic, youthful fight. It was a deliberate, calculated, monstrous act of sabotage. Julian had intercepted the calls. He had lied to Isabella, telling her she was disowned. He had lied to his parents, letting them believe their daughter had simply vanished. He had single-handedly orchestrated this 30-year tragedy to secure his position as the sole heir. At that exact moment, Eleonora burst into the room, her face a mask of panic and regret. Amelia, please, don't go. We can sort this out. I was wrong to doubt you. Please, forgive an old woman's fear. Her words died in her throat as she saw the letters scattered on the floor and the look on Amelia's face. An expression not of hurt or anger, but of cold, devastating, hollowed-out realization. Amelia didn't speak. She simply bent down, picked up the last letter, and handed it to her grandmother. Eleanor's hands shook as she took the fragile paper, her eyes scanning her dead daughter's final, desperate words. She read about the calls, the pregnancy, Daniel's death, but it was the paragraph about Julian that made her world collapse. The lie. The cruel, unforgivable lie. The son she had raised, the man she had entrusted with her empire, had not only allowed his sister to suffer and die in poverty and loneliness, but had actively engineered it. He had let his parents grieve for 3 decades over a loss that he himself had meticulously manufactured. A low, guttural sound of pure agony escaped Eleanor's lips. It was not a cry of grief, but the sound of a soul being torn in two. She looked up from the letter, her eyes once filled with doubt and then panic, now burned with a glacial, terrifying rage. She turned and marched out of the room, the letter clutched in her fist like a death warrant. Amelia followed, knowing this was no longer about her. This was about a 30-year-old crime that was about to be brought into the light. They found Julian and Beatrice in the main hall, standing by the door, smugly waiting for the problem to finally depart. Eleanora strode right up to her son and, without a word, slapped him across the face. The sound cracked through the cavernous space like a gunshot. "You!" she hissed, her voice trembling with a rage so profound it was almost silent. She held up the letter, shaking it in his face. "You did this. You let her die alone. You let us think she was gone. You murdered your own sister." Julian's face went bone white as he saw the letter, his eyes wide with the terror of a man whose darkest secret had just been dragged into the light. The mask of controlled indignation shattered, replaced by pure, cornered panic. "Mother, it wasn't like that. I was trying to protect you. From her. From them." "Protect me?" Eleanor's voice rose to a terrifying roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mansion. "You destroyed us. For money. For power. You are not my son. You are a monster. The truth was out, ugly, brutal, and undeniable. The foundation of the House of Vance had cracked open, revealing the unforgivable rot and betrayal that had festered at its core for 30 years. The aftermath of the revelation was swift and brutal. In the cold light of his treachery, Julian Vance withered. His denials were weak, his excuses pathetic. Beatrice, seeing her entire world of wealth and status evaporating before her eyes, tried to distance herself, claiming she knew nothing of Julian's decades-old secret. But Eleonora was finished with them both. "Get out," Eleonora commanded, her voice devoid of all emotion, save for a chilling finality. "Get out of my house. Mr. Abernathy will contact you tomorrow regarding your severance from the company and your disinheritance. You will receive nothing. You are no longer a part of this family." Julian and Beatrice stood there, stripped of their power, their future annihilated by a bundle of old letters. They left the mansion that day with nothing but their expensive clothes and the public disgrace that was sure to follow. The Vance Empire had a new direction, and they were not a part of it. In the quiet that followed their departure, Eleonora turned to Amelia. The old woman looked fragile, aged by the terrible truth. Yet there was a new clarity in her eyes. She walked over to Amelia and took both of her hands. "I am so sorry," Eleonora said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I failed your mother, and I failed you by doubting you. Can you ever forgive me?" Amelia looked at the broken woman before her, the woman who was her grandmother, and saw not a billionaire or a matriarch, but just a mother who had lost her child. All the anger and hurt she had felt melted away, replaced by a deep, shared sorrow. "There is nothing to forgive," Amelia whispered, squeezing her hands. "You didn't know. We were both lied to." That moment by the fire was not an end, but the true beginning of their family. The legal formalities of the Vance fortune, the signing of papers and the restructuring of trusts, became a mere whisper in the background, handled with quiet efficiency by Mr. Abernathy. The true work was happening within the mansion's stone walls. The weeks that followed were a gentle unfolding, a slow and deliberate process of healing. The vast, silent halls, once monuments to wealth and loss, began to breathe again, filled with the echoes of Leo's joyful shrieks during games of hide-and-seek. Eleonora, Amelia, and Leo became a small, self-contained universe of warmth. Their days were spent not in boardrooms, but in the sprawling rose gardens, where Eleonora would point out the very same blooms she had shown Isabel as a child. She taught Leo how to play chess on a heavy marble board, her heart aching with a sweet sorrow each time he made a move that was so reminiscent of his grandmother's. For Eleonora, it was like watching a cherished ghost come back to life, not to haunt, but to heal. Amelia, in turn, discovered a legacy of her own. Unpacking her mother's old art supplies, she found a talent she never knew she possessed flowing from her fingertips. She sketched everything: the intense concentration on Leo's face as he chased butterflies, the rare, secret smile that would grace Charles the butler's lips, the profound peace on Eleanor's face as she slept in her armchair, finally unburdened. One crisp evening, with the scent of burning oak in the air, Eleonora found Amelia by the fireplace, the Polaris locket resting in her open palm, catching the firelight. "This locket," Eleonora began, her voice soft as velvet, "it holds more than a picture. It holds a promise, a tradition I dreamed of starting. The matriarch passes it to her daughter on her wedding day, who then passes it to hers. It's meant to be a symbol of our guiding star, the unwavering love that always leads us home." She gently took the locket, her cool, papery skin brushing against Amelia's. "It was mine. Then for a short, precious time, it was Isabella's. Now, Amelia, it is yours." With hands that had once signed billion-dollar deals, she carefully fastened the silver chain around Amelia's neck. "Wear it," she whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Not as a sad memory of what we lost, but as a brilliant promise of everything we have found." Amelia touched the star. Its cool metal felt like a connection to the past, but as it warmed against her skin, it became an anchor to her present, her future. It was a legacy of strong women, a line she now proudly claimed as her own. The mansion itself had transformed. The cold, intimidating palace had thawed, becoming a home where laughter was the most valuable currency. The ghosts of the past had not vanished. Instead, they had taken their rightful places as cherished ancestors, their memories woven into the fabric of a new, resilient, and unbreakable family. For what is a fortune compared to a family reunited? Eleanor Vance, the woman who had everything, finally possessed the one treasure she truly needed. And Amelia Reed, the waitress who had nothing, discovered that her greatest inheritance was not the wealth, but the grandmother who had been waiting for her all along, guided home by the light of a silver star. This story is a powerful testament to the enduring strength of family and the healing power of truth. It reminds us that our most valuable treasures are not locked away in vaults, but are held within the bonds of love and forgiveness. If this journey touched your heart, share it with someone who acts as your own guiding star. For more stories that celebrate the incredible resilience of the human spirit, be sure to like, subscribe, and join our community. Thank you for watching.